We're going to continue writing these functions for these graphs. And again, I think the easiest way to start is to pick out whether it's sine or cosine. If it starts at 0, 0, it's sine, and it makes one full S back to the x-axis. If it's sine, it makes one full S back to the x-axis. That is one cycle of pi. If it's cosine, it starts up and comes down, goes back all the way back up to the start. So it always ends where it starts. If it starts down at 0, 0, it ends at the x-axis. If it starts up on the y-axis, it ends up here. And then lastly, number 6 is a sine. It just looks a little bit different. The amplitude is the height. That's the next easiest part. So y is equal to 1 times the sine for 3. Y is equal to 0.4 times the sine. 5, y is equal to 2 times the sine. And 2 or 6, it looks like it's about y is equal to 1/2 times the sine. And I forgot. Number 5 is the cosine. And then we're going to type write bx inside of here. I don't know what happened to my parentheses. So we're going to write bx inside of there. My pen is flipping out. So we're going to find b for all of these. And again, we know that the period is 2 pi over b. So this period here, it looks like 8 pi. So 8 pi is equal to 2 pi over b. We can multiply both sides by b. So it's b times 8 pi is equal to 2 pi. Divide both sides by 8 pi, and you get b is equal to 1/4. So we get sine of 1/4 x. Then this one, again, the period is pi. So pi is equal to 2 pi over b. Multiply both sides by b. So b times pi is equal to 2 pi. Divide both sides by pi, and b is equal to 2. So this is the sine of 2x. And then this period is 4 pi. So 4 pi is equal to 2 pi over b. Multiply both sides by b. So b times 4 pi is equal to 2 pi. And some of you might be finding some shortcuts, which is great. So b is 1/2. And then again, sine of x, I'm sorry, the period is pi over 3 is 2 pi over b. Multiply both sides by b, so b times pi over 3 is equal to 2 pi. And we can multiply both sides by 3 over pi to get rid of that. And then we can get b is equal to 6. So this is 6x. The next two that we're going to go through on this page is, or next one, sorry, is going to be actually graphing them given the function. So if you see here, the amplitude of all of these is just 1. So coefficient, first one is amplitude is 1, 8, the amplitude is 2, 9, the amplitude is 1, 10, the amplitude is 1, 11, and 3 is 3. So first, it's important to know what the amplitude is. And then, if I can write amplitude. So first we find the amplitude. And then we're going to find the period. Well, if the period is 2 pi over b, and b is equal to 2, which is the coefficient of x, then the period is 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 2, which is equal to pi. So the period is pi. So that means it's going to take pi to get through one cycle, one full, starting at 0, 0, going up, down, and back up to the x-axis. Just because of room on this graph, I'm going to make each of these be every other one. This is going to be pi over 4, pi over 2, sorry, I'm going to pause on that for a minute because you don't know why yet. So going backwards, x, we're going to choose some x values. And we're going to get out y. So what we're going to do is we are going to choose values of x that I can put in that it will give me, once I multiply by that b, will give me something on the unit circle. So, and the easiest things I think of on the unit circle are 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So what I want first is to get the sine of 0. I always want to start at the sine of 0. Well, if x is 0, then y is going to be equal to the sine of 0. So if I substitute x in for this x, then we find the sine of 2 times 0, which is just 0. So the sine of 0 is 0. The next thing I want is that the sine of pi over 2, because I know the sine of pi over 2 is equal to 1, because this point up here is 0, 1. Well, to get the sine of pi over 2, if I think about it over here for x has to be pi over 4, because pi over 4, if I substitute it in for that x, pi over 4 times 2 is equal to pi over 2, which is what I want to be inside of there. So pi over 2 I know is going to be equal, I'm sorry, if x is pi over 4, sine of pi over 2 is going to be equal to 1. So again, I want to keep going through this unit circle. And because I know the sine of pi is going to be 0, the sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1, and the sine of 2 pi is back to 0. So then I'm going to think, well, what do I need x to be to get pi to be inside of the sine, or what we're finding the sine of? Well, if this x value is pi over 2, when I substitute it in for this x, 2 times pi over 2 is going to give me this pi. If I substitute in 3 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4 times 2 is going to give me that 3 pi over 2. And then lastly, if we make this into pi, substitute pi in for x, we get the sine of 2 pi, which is what I want there. What I want to show you also is, so that's the long way of thinking about it. That's a perfectly fine way of thinking about it. I find my x values, I get out y values. And, I'm going to come back to what I was just about to say. So now I'm going to plot these points. So now I can use these x values for my x-axis. So now I'm going to go, this is going to be 0, and I'm going to go pi over 4. I'm going to skip every other line just because it will wind up getting crowded. Pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and come back to pi. And that's one full period. So 0, 0 is my first point, and then I'm going to figure out where my amplitude is. I can use these numbers for anything. So I'm going to just use 1 here and negative 1 here, just so it's not a tiny graph. You could put 1 all the way up here if you want. So we have 0, 0, pi over 4, 1. Pi over 2, 0. 3 pi over 4, negative 1. And then we come back up to pi. That's one full cycle, or one period. The period is equal to pi, which is where I ended up. Oops. That was really weird. We could keep going. It's going to keep going up and then back down again and so forth. It doesn't just stop at the period, and it keeps going this way also. So the sine wave, that's what it's called, is, or sinusoidal wave, is going to keep going up and down and up and down. If we look here to these x values, my eraser doesn't want to work. Come on, eraser. If we look here to these x values, if we look at pi over 4 is 1/4. And then I have 2/4, and then 3/4, and then 4/4. I want to point that out because that's going to happen later on too. Or I'm going to show a similar thing. So if 4 over 4, or 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4 is going to be my x values. And again, I'll point that out when we go to the next one.